This PowerPoint presentation addresses reliability factors, that is, how to assess the reliability of children's statements in a forensic interview. Sometimes we are called upon to determine the reliability of a video recording of a child's statement or an audio recording of a child's statement. Often attorneys, whether they be child protection attorneys or prosecutors, have to demonstrate that a child's statement to an interviewer is trustworthy or reliable. And the courts have laid out a set of factors that we can review and apply to any forensic interview of a child in an effort to size up or assess the reliability of that forensic interview. You have read and reviewed the cases of Idaho versus Wright, which was a United States Supreme Court case, and State of New Jersey versus Gado, which was a New Jersey case. Both of those cases, in part, looked at the different factors that we could use to determine the trustworthiness or reliability of a child's statement. I have made a list of the reliability factors that the courts have identified as significant when sizing up the trustworthiness or believability of a child's statement about sexual abuse. The first three factors are very similar: idiosyncratic details and gestures or acting out of events, developmentally unusual sexual knowledge, or developmentally unusual sexual behavior. All of these refer to the child demonstrating knowledge about human sexuality that is beyond their age. This typically applies to children less than 12, and the younger the child, the more relevant the reliability factor. For example, a child describing that a white sticky stuff came out of Grandpapa's penis, or a milky substance came out of his penis, would be considered an idiosyncratic detail. Or if the child describes that his penis changed in some way, it became hard, it stuck out differently. An idiosyncratic detail describing what could reasonably be interpreted as an erection would be an idiosyncratic detail, or an example of developmentally unusual sexual knowledge. Sometimes children will explain or demonstrate masturbation. They'll move their hand back and forth when describing what the perpetrator did with their hand. Imagine a child who the perpetrator grabbed her hand and put it on his penis, and then the child says he moved it back and forth, and then she moves her hand back and forth, consistent with somebody who is masturbating. That would be developmentally unusual sexual behavior. Obviously, there is a variety of idiosyncratic or developmentally unusual sexual behavior that a child may describe that would be relevant as to the trustworthiness of their account. The full range of human sexuality would be relevant. A child could describe any number of things, and you would point to that as demonstrating reliability. Sometimes children might describe the perpetrator getting a rag or a towel and cleaning up or wiping something off of the child's body or their own body, which would not be a direct reference to ejaculation, but an indirect reference to ejaculation. Nevertheless, that would be an idiosyncratic or odd detail that a child would not know that there was something to clean up or there was some sort of mess after sexual contact. The child's display of emotion would be relevant. If the child becomes upset or has a difficult time expressing what happened because it was traumatic for them, that emotion demonstrated while they're explaining what happened to them could be an indicator of reliability. Courts have concluded that when the statement of the child is videotaped or video recorded in some way, that that is arguably more reliable because the court can look at the child's emotions, their demeanor, their affect, their behavior, and be in a better position to assess reliability. Similarly, if a child's statement is overheard by a third party, if that child made a statement in the principal's office about being abused, and there was a third party there who overheard the statement, courts have found that those kinds of statements are more reliable because you have a third party who can corroborate what the child said. Where the child disagrees or corrects the interviewer is considered a reliability factor. One of the issues that concerns the court is whether the child is giving a statement from their own recollection of being abused, or giving a statement because it was suggested to them, or because some adult put the idea in their head. Well, if during a forensic interview the child stops the interviewer and disagrees or corrects the interviewer, that would rebut any assertion that the child is providing a statement that is the product of suggestion, or she is simply saying what the interviewer expects. The fact that the child disagreed or corrected the interviewer can be pointed to as evidence that the child is not simply agreeing with whatever the interviewer says, or the child is making a statement that is scripted or has been coached. Spontaneity is an important factor. Spontaneity is also related to the issue of suggestibility. If the child offers information about being abused without being prompted, or without the interviewer having suggested anything, that is, they spontaneously express themselves, courts have found that that is an indicator of reliability. An absence of motive to fabricate. If there's no reason for the child to make up the story, if the child does not have any bias against the person who was accused, then courts have found it is more likely that the statement is true. For example, there was a case once where a child made an allegation against the person who worked at the carnival. She was at the carnival and visiting a section of the carnival where you could pet baby goats. In that case, the child had no connection to the accused, no connection to the alleged perpetrator. Yet she explained that he had fondled her body and engaged in sexual contact with her. One could point out that that child had no motive to fabricate. She had no connection to the accused. The perpetrator was not someone that she had any bias or grudge against. There would be no reason for her to fabricate a story. Things become a little more difficult when it is an account of incest or intrafamilial abuse, which is very common. Nevertheless, even in those cases, one can point out that the child had no basis to make up a false allegation. This becomes a little dicier with teenagers, where it can be argued that the teenager had some kind of motive to fabricate because they were being disciplined, or they broke curfew, or they ran away from home. Therefore, they were trying to deflect blame from themselves. But typically with younger children, in many cases, you can point out that there was no motive to fabricate. A child may have made a statement against interest. What we mean by a statement against interest is the child believes they're going to get in trouble, or that they did something wrong themselves when they were abused. I had a case one time where an 8-year-old girl was discovered with her stepfather late at night in a park. When the police drove up to the car drove away, and eventually they caught the car. The stepfather was taken into custody and the child was interviewed. And the child kept repeating over and over in a tearful, totally emotional way that she didn't want to say what happened because grandma would give her a whooping. Now that would be a statement against interest. Eventually, when she explained what stepdad did in the car to her, that he engaged in sexual conduct and fondled her, that statement was made. The statement about being fondled was made against her own interest. Because she believed, whether true or not, she believed she was going to get punished and physically abused by her grandmother for telling what stepfather did. That would be considered a statement against interest. There are lots of ways that children communicate that they don't want to tell because they will get in trouble. If that's in the case, that's something we can refer to as demonstrating that the statement is reliable and believable. Because people generally don't make statements that are against their own interest. Courts have also looked at consistency of repetition in assessing the reliability of a child's statement. And what we mean by that is the child gives an account of something that occurred to them, and then later on they are repeating that account and it is consistent. This sometimes happens when we use anatomical dolls. For example, if the child describes being molested in the tool shed by one of her friend's older brothers, and then later on the interviewer asks the child in an effort to get more details to show what happened with the anatomical dolls, and the child shows what happened, if that account when using the dolls is consistent with her verbal account from earlier in the interview, we can argue that the statement is reliable, that there's consistency. Consistency is something that's used throughout the law to determine whether a witness is believable or not. Or, for example, if a child made her initial disclosure to the school guidance counselor, and that guidance counselor wrote a detailed report about the words the child used and how that child expressed what happened to her, and then later in the forensic interview, she gives an account again of the same incident, and it's generally consistent. Courts have said that that is something they will look at to determine reliability. That is, the consistency demonstrates trustworthiness. And lastly, the courts focus on the behavior of the interviewer. If the child's statement is a product of interrogation or highly suggestive interview process or manipulation by an adult, coaching and things like that, if that's part of the case, that needs to be factored in as well. Clearly, a sexual abuse account that's the product of interrogation or significant suggestion would be considered less reliable. On the other hand, if you're sizing up a forensic interview, you can point to the absence of interrogation, the absence of repeated suggestion, the absence of manipulation by the adult as something that is evidence of trustworthiness. So these are the factors that you can look at to size up whether a child's statement is believable or not, or trustworthy, or reliable. They're not exclusive. That means that you may find other things in an interview that are not on this chart, that don't appear on this list. Other ways that the child expresses herself, or other behaviors that the child engages in explaining how, when, and where she was molested, that might be evidence of a reliable account. And you can point to those as well. Again, this list is not exclusive. So when you size up a video, you can come up with your own reasons why you believe the child is worthy of belief or that the statement is reliable. So I hope this helps you with your learning projects. Good luck.